Hey everyone, thanks for joining. I'm speaking with Sadia Hameed again today. Sadia is a human rights activist. She's got an organization called Gloucestershire Sisters, and I wanted to speak to her today specifically about racism, everything that's happened in the U.S., what's going on around the world, the horrific killing of George Floyd, and I think I want to focus a little bit more around the general discourse and where I think this is. The discourse is going wrong, and some of it sounds good, but where is it coming from, and why some of the popular attitudes might not be the right way to go about it. And then I'm sure Sadia's got other stuff she wants to talk about, so we're just going to kind of talk about race and racism and everything that's going on. Hey, Sadia, thanks for coming back on.
Hi, thank you for having me, babe.
So we're gonna solve the world's race relations today, are we?
Yeah, in like an hour. What have been your thoughts about what's happening?
Okay, for me, it's okay. The George Floyd thing, right? Everyone said it, and it was absolutely disgusting and horrific. And I hope those officers face the harshest penalties, like the full extent of the law, and there should be no quarter given. And it's and obviously, but it has to be a fair trial. You can't just 1 hour long trial and then you're guilty and
also when mob rule takes over, it undermines the whole legal process. So find me one person on this planet that's going to stand there and say what happened was right. I haven't seen it. I haven't heard it.
Now,
they'd have to be mentally deranged to say something like that. Not a single person has said that. So you're right, the harshest punishment should be vetted out, but also within the bounds of the law. So I think the manslaughter punishment would have been perfect for them, right? Because what he did was manslaughter. It wasn't murder. The burden of proof required for murder is much, much higher, rightfully so. It wasn't murder. And actually, at this point, we could have had a conversation about the kind of use of putting your knee on somebody's neck. Not acceptable. Police brutality. The need for the law to change, policy to change. The need to deal with the weapons issue. Nobody, in my opinion, should be carrying weapons. I think the only exception that I think it's acceptable is counter-terrorism police, because of the kind of world that we live in. Absolutely. I don't think civilians should have guns, and I don't think the generic police need to be carrying guns. But I haven't seen a single person say that what happened was right. So the kind of backlash in this, and even the police, even in the police, they've had a lot of support, the protesters. I think there's a difference between protesting and rioting. I think there's a difference between those that protest, in a place and to somebody who has the power to change things. But if you go and start smashing up shops and beating up people that have got nothing to do with policy, with law, with reform, with even, that are even powerful enough to affect politics, when you go and harm them, destroy their property, destroy their bodies, I saw some really violent videos, people lose sympathy pretty quickly, because the answer to police brutality isn't more brutality or more violence.
But okay, and on this police thing, right now, this happened in the United States, and we can have the statistics talks and all that, but the biggest issue here, I don't think it's a race issue. I think it is, like you're saying, it's a policing issue. Are the police trained properly? And as this has been going on, a lot of people have been. There's I forget the guy's name, but he did a really good thread, and it's like, okay, there's points in what you need, and it's some of these laws I didn't know about, and this is the United States. I live in Canada, so it's not something that I would always look into, but this unqualified amnesty that the police had, no, get rid of that. That's wrong, you don't need that. And people are like, oh well, police can't do their jobs. That only came in the 80s, so they were doing their jobs just fine until then, right? But all that stuff is, I don't want to argue against it. I don't want to, I think all that stuff is good. Do more body cams, independent tribunals, if something goes wrong, outside investigators, like you don't do it within the police force itself, all of that, that's good. But I think one thing that has to be looked at too is all these diversity programs that have come into the police since the late 90s. And I'm using the late 90s specifically because it wasn't like they didn't talk about racism or anything like that before.
Yeah.
But again, this is me making some extrapolations, looking at when curriculum came into universities, speaking to people, in schools, speaking to people in academia, speaking to people who've looked at it, and then reading stuff from people like Jonathan Haidt and Christina Hoff Sommers and stuff like that. And just so in the late 90s was when the first people who had masters or maybe PhDs in intersectional feminism and critical race theory started graduating, right? The master's level and the doctorate level started graduating. They started getting into junior imaginers positions, intern positions in government, in journalism schools, in journalism period, in academia, in administration and universities. So if you needed okay, we're going to work on CERN, so you're going to go get a PhD in particle physics or something, right? Like you're going to go get an expert.
Yeah.
Well, the police have a problem with racism, so let's go get a PhD in critical race theory. But that's a logical thing to do, right? Because here's an expert in race. They have a PhD in discussing race. And it's a lot of this stuff sounds really nice, like critical race theory. It sounds like critical thinking, but they're not using the word the same.
No.
I think you can point to this, and things were getting better. Like I moved to Canada. My family moved to Canada in 1975. I was 6 years old. I grew up in Montreal, fairly diverse place, but predominantly white. Everything. I experienced some racism growing up, but things were getting so much better. Things were it was, and we'd gotten to the point where attitudes had come to the realization that there's a lot of stuff still wrong in the background, and we could look at those things. But we turned to critical race theory to look at how to fix those things.
Yeah.
And I mean, if we're going to look at policing, if we're going to look at everything going forward, I think we have to look at how we're dealing with it. And we've done it for the last 20 years. It hasn't worked. Yeah. Let's find a different way to do it. And and the reason I bring it up is because everyone's using the term anti-racism and they don't know quite what it means. Like it sounds nice, but if you're not anti-racist, you're racist. How about I just don't support racism and I just don't be racist? But that's not good enough, right? You have to be anti-racist, and you have to look at yourself and the racism you've caused, how you've aided the system, right? And when they say system, they mean everything. Yeah. And so if you're an immigrant, and this comes straight from the literature, this is why I'm opposed to this stuff, and why I think it's wrong, and why I think it's not going to help in fighting anything that's going on right now. If you're an immigrant and you've come over and you've done well in the UK or the United States or Canada, you are part of the colonizing force. You have taken on the system. You have taken on whiteness. You are part of white supremacy. And because you are helping the colonizers out, because these people are still colonizers, you are aiding in the genocide of the indigenous people. You're helping whiteness, right? So, and then this stuff of blackness as well, right? So if a Nigerian family moves to the United States, or moved to the United States 15 years ago, and they had young children with them, their children basically grew up in the United States, their children are in their 20s now, and are going to school. I mean, they're told that they don't have blackness or they're not politically black. That thing with Joe Biden, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. And then there were critical race scholars, like people with blue check marks, a woman who just won the Pulitzer, right? Hannah Nicole Smith, saying, well, we know what all that means. That you can be black or you can be politically black. There's two different things.
I don't like this politicizing of identities. I don't like that if you're LGBT, you have to be left wing. I don't like if you're an immigrant, you have to be left wing. I don't like that your identity is politicized, because the worst thing happens with that. When you politicize any issue, what that means is there's a lot of people that don't end up getting the support that they're entitled to. A good example of that was the British grooming gangs, because the BNP came in and started campaigning about this issue. Now, anytime any person in this country mentions the grooming gangs, all of a sudden they're considered far right. And I think the same with immigration as well. You can't talk about immigration without being accused of being far right. If you're not an open border zealot, you're far right. It's ridiculous. Why are all of these conversations politicized? That would never be a condition for somebody who went to the doctors. Although I saw something about here that if you, and I didn't check it out, I'm just going to tell you what I saw, which made my blood boil. But if you're racist or a far right, that you can be denied medical help. That is not acceptable. And like I said, I didn't check it out. I just saw it. I didn't check it out. But if that's starting to happen, that's not okay. Because even that person pays taxes. And by behaving like that, what are you going to change?
Yep. Okay. And I just want to swing this back around. Okay. There is problems with racism. And again, I'll state this again. And there are people looking into it. But we as society or whatever, the policymakers, when they started putting this stuff in the late 90s or by about 2000, they took us backwards. We are back where we were. I think it's worse than when I was here in the 70s. And, and everyone is so hyper-focused on race. I mean, there was that picture of that poor young girl. And I don't know how old she was. To me, she looked like she was about 4 or 5. And she looked so sad. And she's holding up a thing saying privileged. And I mean, that to me reminded me of that movie, Jesus Camp. I don't know if you've ever seen Jesus Camp. If you haven't, check it out. It's horrific what they do to these kids. It's these evangelicals. And, there's a way to have a conversation about race with your kids. And,
and that isn't it.
No, it's not. But I mean, I saw another one. It was a young black girl, and I think she was 9 or 10. Again, I can't tell age with kids. But she looked about 9 or 10, and she was crying and bawling because that she might get killed because of the color of her skin. Now that kind of.
To her, this is the problem, right? When you leave kids to it, they actually just get on with things by themselves. Her family have radicalized her to believe that that's the case. This is part of the problem with this whole anti-racist brigade. They make everything about race, even when things are starting to get better. And I mean, I can't say for certain, because I'm not American. I don't live in America. My understanding is the Deep South is still quite bad, actually. But I don't know for certain. But what the families are doing to their children isn't helping. They're not encouraging them to cohabitate. They want them to segregate. It's facilitated by the parents and the activists. The activists are actually the worst of the lot, really.
No, but and I mean, again, maybe we should spend some time on what we think would work, but. It's just because I'm seeing everyone taking these pledges. I have friends of mine taking these pledges and they don't know what it means. And I'm trying to say, look, just read some of this stuff. Okay. So there's a book called Acting White. All right. It came out in 2013, I believe. This is being used in universities. This book and the authors. I don't want to say for 100%, but I believe the authors are working on pedagogy for K through 12 and curriculums. But it's being used in curriculums. There's videos from New York City. There's a guy telling New York City educators about how being on time is acting white, and you shouldn't force your students of color to be on time or get their work in on time because you're forcing them to act white. Okay.
So lower the standards of any person of color so that they don't achieve the same. That's the way to do it.
Oh, okay, no, but because of cultural difference, I mean, I'm like, that's going back to the 50s. That's separate but equal, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a friend of mine, granted, like, this is, an N of one, but like, you can see it, like, with that little girl holding up the sign. A friend of mine put an article in Medium about his kids. He's white, his wife is Asian, so like Asian in the North American sense, so like East Asian, right? So they're mixed race kids. And how they came home one day this past school year and said they wish they weren't half white. Okay, I mean, that's horrific. And this is this is why I think there's a big problem on the talk of racism, because this is what's being used. And this is being sold to you as being anti-racist.
This is what we heard from black, brown, immigrant kids in this country before, right? In the Anglosphere and Western sort of countries, that's what we used to hear from, like, kids of colour. We used to hear that. Is the flip of that exactly what you want to achieve? Because that's still a very damaged child that you're creating. And it was actually that kind of made me really think about this recently. I had somebody that I was working with who said that she hates white people, right? And I was just like, so I've got nieces that are mixed race. They're half brown, half white. And I was like, so which half of them do you love and which half of them do you hate? That's what made me think of it. And I think that those kids are the future. Like, that is how we get rid of this kind of racism, really, by breeding together, by falling in love, breeding together, having new generations grow up that are a mixture of different racial and ethnic backgrounds. I think that's a really positive thing. And to have a time now where we're going back to being against that is just mind-boggling. I thought one of the more progressive things to come out of all of these the current situation was the new slogan, "All Lives Matter." Apparently, that's fucking racist now.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
Okay, that whole thing with "All Lives Matter" now, because I mean, Black Lives Matter came into huge prominence on the national scene. I'm not saying they weren't there before, and people knew, but in 2015 with the Ferguson, right? That's when it got the. Now I understand in the thing with Ferguson. I even understand with George Floyd. Those protests, because it was a black man killed by the police, and and like I said, we can get into the stats and all that again, and I think the statistics are important, but if you're a young black kid and you're pulled over by the cops for driving your car for something stupid, statistics at that point don't matter to you. You're pissed off, right? And this stuff happens. Let's not pretend. Okay, this wasn't the police or anything, but this was right after 9/11. So this was the November after 9/11. I was flying to go to a wedding. Now there's a couple in front of me. There's two ticket agents. There's a couple in front of me. One of the ticket agents gets empty. They go to them. I'm standing, and then the next ticket agent gets empty right away. I start walking up. I'm brown. People might confuse me for Arab. I've been confused for all kinds of things. But this is, like I said, this is November after 9/11. So the first ticket agent that was serving the couple took a look at me, and she fainted. Now, okay. Now, I could have raised a huge stink. Is this racism? Is this? But I mean, I don't know. I don't know what's going. Maybe maybe her sugar dropped. I have no idea. Right?
I mean, that's a very, very extreme example that she fainted. That's mental. But, when the IRA were bombing, when they were bombing Britain, Irish people used to get pulled to one side and patted down and searched. All of these sort of things used to happen. So what do you call that? It's just the difficulty is the people that are against this kind of profiling. And like I said, your example is quite extreme. Like, it seems a little bit attention seeky, that, if you don't mind me saying.
Yeah. No.
That's different. But fainting and creating a scene, I'm like,
okay, yeah, whatever. But like I said, I laughed. I honestly laughed at that. But okay, sticking with the same theme, right? I was working in Afghanistan, and before that I was in Bosnia, and then I'd done some traveling, and So right after I'd done a trip to Southeast Asia, and I was in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia and Malaysia and Thailand, I come back to the base. Now, I've got stamps in my passport from everywhere, right? And I've got visas from Afghanistan. I'm coming in and out. And my company's telling me that they want to take away my NATO ID every time I went out on leave.
Right.
And I just said no. I said, I'm not going to do that. And they're like, what? And I said, well, look on the back of what it says. I'm only allowed to hand this over to an MP or something. It said it on the back of the ID. I said, I'm not handing over to the company security. I said, I'm not doing that. And B, I looked at them because, okay, this is in 2005. The whole war on terrorism going on. Like I said, I was in Afghanistan. Yeah. I looked at them and I said, I'm not white enough to show up at the border with all these stamps in my passport and not have that ID. And it's, okay, that is a reality. That was a reality. I'm not saying racism. Because frankly, I would want the border guards to check me with that passport. Okay, the way I looked, it's just, that's common sense. That's not profiling on me. Like my passport. Go ahead.
But the thing is, right, in this situation, the problem I have is, yes, profiling might not be ideal, right? However, what is the solution for the people that become really hysterical about profiling? All right, give us a solution. Pop your hysteria to one side, because I've had enough of that, thank you very much. But give me a solution. Have you thought of something else? If you haven't, pop yourself to one side and let us crack on with our job, because there's still that threat. Like, you have to think about these things logically. Now, yes, I might not like it. However, I don't have another solution. So I'm like, yep, pat me down, that'll do, But unless you've got a concrete solution to the thing that you're hysterical about, you actually can't get properly involved in the conversation, because emotions and your hysteria are not doing anything. They're not solving anything. They're not a proper rebuttal to your argument. That's the problem, really.
But okay, like, going on with this, because I sent you that thing from Quilliam.
Yeah.
And I agree with some of the things they're saying in it, but I'm like, okay, you know what? Okay, so they're saying we have to look at anti-black racism in the Muslim communities. Yeah, fine. I agree there's a lot of it there. I agree with it. But, you, myself to a lesser degree, people like Sarah Hayter, people like Mohammed Saeed, people like Imtiaz Shams, like people in ex-Muslim spaces, even like people like Majid Nawaz, reformers and stuff like that, have been talking about this, right? It's the people like Reza Aslan and Sadia Hameed, Mehdi Hassan, and and the progressive, like stupid identity things, but I have to. This stuff forces me, like white liberal progressives who called us Islamophobic, who called us racist, who called us white supremacists for talking about it.
So those examples, right, of those, like you, right, the huge frustration I have when we start talking about this arena, we do start using people's racial categories. But those liberals that you're talking about, tell you what, right, immigration is an issue in Britain. I'm not closed borders, but I'm definitely categorically not open borders. So we had our Home Secretary. She's Indian, from Uganda, I think it was. She created this new immigration policy, which was quite sensible, I thought. And because she's a conservative, the same liberal, progressive, anti-racist, you should have heard the racism that was pouring out of them. So these anti-racists, like I said, whether they're white, brown, or whoever they are, these leftists, these progressives, these liberals, if people don't agree with them, they're the very first ones that will smash that shit out of the park. They will be racist. They will be, if you're disabled, they'll start talking about that, because you have to. If you're disabled, if you've got learning difficulties, if you've got mental health issues, if you're LGBT or the rest of the alphabet, or you're an immigrant or you're from a BME background, unless you're left wing, you don't get any privileges, you don't get any rights. You're not entitled to that. You're less than them. It's ridiculous. So we're not allowed to think for ourselves. That has to be controlled by these morons.
Yeah, but okay, but I mean that it's like this is it's a really horrific mixture of blank statism and essentialism. That the race is the construct, and that there's the blank statism, right? And then, but then they define what it means to be black. They define what it means to be, Pakistani or East Asian or whatever, right? And if you don't fit that definition, Kanye puts on a MAGA hat. All of a sudden, Kanye isn't black. I mean, like, what the hell is that? Now,
I just watched a video 5 minutes ago, 5 minutes before we got on here, and some vegan activist was talking about how it's all to do, the meat industry is all to do with capitalism. I was like, hang on a minute, mate. You're the very same kind of people that would line up at KFC because they've got a new vegan burger at KFC. Yeah. What do you think that is?
Yeah. No, but it's a
massive industry. The vegan industry is a massive industry. It's got a lot to do with capitalism. So back the fuck off.
Yeah, but again, like this. Right, we can the George Floyd thing. Like, I understand why they're saying anti-black racism. But again, depending on who's using it, some people know where that comes from. It's all around the stuff of blackness. What is blackness? What is it to be black? So if you're anti-black racist, you're not being racist against black people per se. You're being racist against blackness. So if you don't fit into blackness, it doesn't really matter. Now, again, getting back to these discussions of race and things like that. Yes, the Muslim community should look at its racism. But if you're talking specifically about the Pakistani Muslim community in the UK right now, this is UK specific. You'd mention the grooming gangs. Yeah. You know what? The racism the Pakistani community has to look at is their racism against white people. Right?
Yeah.
And the police and the authorities and social services and whatever, the people who are holding up that report, they should look at how they're being racist against white people. How this was, I mean, I don't care what anyone says. This was pure, unadulterated. I mean, let's take the disgusting sexual aspect about it. Like, this was done because they're white. They're white slags. They're white whores. You can do what you want to them. It doesn't matter.
Because even brown girls that are not brown enough, if they're not if they're westernized in any way, shape or form, right, they become a target as well. If they start falling out the remit of what's permitted in their community, in their household, they also become a target. So they hate anything that's Western, anything that's is it white adjacent? I don't know if that's the moronic term. It's so demented, But the thing is, for me, the solution, I've never thought the solution to racism is more racism, because that's all I've seen. Yeah. Being an anti-racist doesn't mean you have to be anti-white or anti-Western or anti-European. And also, it shows how demented these people really are, because the majority of white people in most European countries have nothing to do with politics, have nothing to do with policy, have nothing to do with legislation, absolutely zero. So why would you blame them for something A, their ancestors, or B, the elites of these countries are doing, when they don't have any say in it? They might have a say in their vote, but you have that same power. Yep. So they're not above you. The true discussion that none of these morons are willing to have is class. That's still a discussion that they're going to shy away from, because in Britain there used to be signs on doors that everybody knows about, right? No blacks, no white, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs, right? But there also used to be signs on doors saying no working class people. Classism was that prevalent at one point, but that's been just completely erased from the conversation, erased from history. How the hell is that happening? And actually, the historic kind of equality struggles in this country, they used to unite the working class, and people of color used to unite with working class people. LGBT people used to unite with working class people, because they were like, you get the same crap as we do. Like, there was a brilliant film called Pride, and that was exactly what it was about. Like, there was LGBT like activist in London that saw what the miners were going through when the miner strike was happening. So he just got on he got down there. He started collecting money, cracked on, trying to support them, even though in the first instance they were really hostile to him. But that wasn't a condition to support. This solidarity just came unconditionally. We're here. You get the same crap we do. We're going to support you. That was it. And then the next pride, these miners usually would be probably be quite homophobic because macho or that way for the type thing. They were there. They went down in their busloads. So this kind of our right come by trampling over somebody else's right. It doesn't work in my books, really. One of the most inspirational moments in British history for me was Grunwick, where you had they worked in I forget where it was. They were mostly South Asian workers that were striking for fairer pay, better working conditions for everybody, not just for themselves, right? It wasn't a case of we're brown, we want our workers' rights, bollocks to everybody else's. And the same dockers that had marched in favour of Enoch Powell's River of Blood speech were there because this was a fight for workers everywhere, universal workers' rights. We wanted equality, and that was it. That was the primary aim. That was one of the most defining sort of moments for me in British history, and I love that. It's been done to death, the Grunwick strike, but I loved it. And now we have groups that want priority. They don't, and they want to push other people out of the way. I just don't think that's the way to win.
No.
I don't think you're going to do it that way.
And again, I mean, like, okay, like I said, look at where this stuff comes from. And honestly, like, I'm going to put a couple of links in the description. There's a friend of mine, Jim Lindsay, and he's putting out a book with Helen Pluckrose coming out, but he's got this website called newdiscourses.com. Excuse me. Now he's starting an encyclopedia. He was working on slowly. I think he's pushing a lot of stuff out now. But it is the definition or the redefinition of these terms in the critical race theory language. And he's also doing some queer theory, and he's got intersectional stuff in it. I mean, reading these books is harsh. Like, they're not big, but the language is horrible, and they're unbelievably, they're horrid. Like, the ideas in them are like, we can get into those in a second, but the ideas in them are just really disgusting. But Jim breaks it down. So if you hear anti-racism, go on the New Discourses website, check out what that means and what that entails. And he's got hyperlinks. He's got all his sources. He's got the books he's read. You can go read that out. I mean, like I said, you know what? White fragility is selling. Read it. Just read what it says. There's a section in White Fragility. I sent you that Medium article, right, about the white women's suicide, and you saw the note at the end. And that's why I said, like, read the whole thing, because I want you, because so they took a section of White Fragility, and I mean, I know who did it. I think I'm almost 100% sure. I believe it was Jim who did it, but took a section of White Fragility, and it was a section on white women's tears, and they replaced white women's tears with white women's suicide. Yeah. And this is where you hear, like, white silence is violence, right? So, and then also, this is the other side. If white people speak out about racism, whatever, that's also violence, and that's also racist. So, if you've told a woman that a white woman that her whole race is racist, and you go through the litany of everything, which I can list it off for you, right? She's responsible for all this, even though she's never done anything racist in her life. You know, she could have, a partner that's a different color. I mean, like, what? It doesn't matter. But and if she starts crying because of this, because this is, you know, you're laying something quite harsh on someone, and she gets upset and starts crying, her tears are violence because she is drowning out black voices and trying to center the conversation on herself again, and she's trying to make a show of being sad about being racist. This is fucking horrendous. I literally go read White Fragility, see how awful it is, and think, is that the right way you want to deal with racism? Because it's not. It's one of the worst possible ways to deal with racism. And
there's two things that are going to come out of that, isn't it? There's going to be self-loathing for that person, or it's going to be anger and contempt, because they know that they've done nothing wrong, and both of those aren't healthy. You know, if you're wanting to bring everybody up to the same level and make sure everybody has the same rights and equality, that is not the way to do it. You know, I had this, the embarrassing thing is I had this approach a few years ago when I first started getting into like talking about sort of harmful traditional practices. I had this approach like, you know, if you don't get it, then you're a racist, da, da, da. I had done that, and I'm very embarrassed about that and ashamed about that. But the truth is, you realize at some point that everybody's lives are so busy. There's two kinds of ignorance. There's innocent ignorance because they just didn't know. Because let's face it, like our education systems are pretty weak, aren't they? Like you don't get a huge amount. I learned about feminism after school, not even in university. Actually, I learned that in my own time. There was a lot that I learned in my own time. So there's that, and then there's like nasty ignorance, people that know and then they just go, I don't care, bugger off, right? But the innocent ignorance, generally people are busy, they don't have time or the inclination to look at things that aren't relevant to their life. It's that simple, and it's not out of a place of nastiness. It's just that there is nobody that I know that isn't working to the point of exhaustion most of the time. I know some people have had a break recently, but people generally are so busy. If it's not relevant to their life, they don't even look into it. And why should they? Why do we expect people to know about everything that's ever happened in the world? It's an unrealistic and unfair demand.
Yeah. And then you have to have an opinion on everything, and if you don't have the right opinion, you're the worst human being in the world, right? And okay, I don't know if you saw the videos of the teenagers saying how calling out their parents on racism and stuff like that.
No, I didn't.
Okay, again, it's horrific, right? This is going back to the Red Guard. This is going back to Pol Pot. I mean, here, I'll just read you two quotes. It's just they're horrific, but like these videos are teenagers calling out their parents' racism, and one girl's like, I wish I didn't live here, my parents are the most racist, and I don't know what their parents said, I don't know their parents, right? But the fact that these young people are so concerned about racism leads me to believe that their parents are probably decent people, okay? But they've been taught this stuff, and so just give me a second here. This is one quote. When an opponent declares, I will not come over to your side, I calmly say your child belongs to us already. What are you? You will pass on. Your descendants, however, now stand in the new camp. In a short time, they will know nothing else but this new community. This stuff has been in education. Like, okay, I can speak for Canada and roughly the United States. Since about 2013 or so, this has been in high schools. Like this critical race theory, like curriculums have been built around this, and this whiteness, like being white and all that stuff that we were talking about. Since about 2013, it's been in high schools and the last couple of years of middle school. For the last couple of years now, maybe a little bit more, it's been in K through 12 in like 3 provinces in Canada, all the way through. So they like. I'm not saying they did this expressly or whatever, but you can't, like, when children start making these videos, you can read. Okay, this is from the Khmer Rouge. Let me just try to find it. Okay, later Khmer Rouge killed the wives and children of the executed men in order to avoid revenge. They encouraged children to find fault with their own parents and spy on them. They openly showed their intentions to destroy the family structure that once held love, faith, comfort, happiness, and companionship. Like I keep going back to this. Like this, they've been using this in schools, and not specifically like this, but programs built around this thinking. They've been using it for 20 years, right? Yeah. And I've seen it so many times that there's that African. I just used it recently, making this point. The child that's not shown love from the village will find warmth in the fire that he sets to burn it down. For 20 years. Yeah. The village has been telling children that no one loves them, or they've been telling other children that you are the cause of all these problems. And it's bubbling up right now. We're doing a disservice to our kids. We're doing a disservice to our societies. These are really, really important issues. Like, like I said, I felt racism. I've had people be racist towards me. I think I've not had an interview because of my name or something after 9/11. I've got an Arab sounding name. I'm not going to change my name. I'm not going to raise, I know. Do I like it? No. Do I think it exists? Do I think it's a prevailing force? No, I do not. I'm not that pessimistic. I think things got really good up until the late 90s, and then we started doing this shit. And let's go back to what we were doing then. Like, someone, again, recently did a study of major newspapers in the United States and when they used, and they might have used, like, The Guardian and stuff as well. I'm not 100% sure, but I can go back and look at the study. But it was right around 2008, 2009 that it was like looking at a COVID curve, right? So nothing, then it just goes up, right? So around 2008, 2009, it just goes up. The instances where they used race, racism, racist, white supremacy in articles. You're continuously told that you're living in a racist society. It is so depressing when your eyes tell you that you're not, right?
Yeah.
And you're being made to look for it everywhere. Like, sorry, I'll stop after this and I'll let you right. But a friend of mine put this up recently on Twitter. It was a picture it was an advert for something. Maybe it was for the frying pan. I don't know, but it was a frying pan with 2 eggs and a couple of rashers of bacon to make a smile, right? And he says, does this strike you as racist? Because the frying pan itself was black. Every single frying pan in my house is black. If I took that picture, I'd get that. Now, was it someone trying to do something cute? Because it looked kind of silly and stupid. The 2 eggs over easy, and like the
I like that.
Okay.
I like that. It was a smile.
Yeah, but and then like he's getting responses that there's something racist about that. I'm like, what? I mean, like, maybe the guy who took it, maybe that was his intention. I don't know, but I just saw the picture. I kind of snickered a little bit. It's not like I was a bellyache or whatever, but it's not racist.
No, but look, this is an industry now, right? The anti-racist, this kind of activist community, it's an industry. You can get funds to be able to do anti-racist work. So even where there's not racism, they have to create that kind of hysteria, The trouble is, when there's genuine issues of racism, I bet they're not going to be there. The kind of the more important discussions, they're absent quite often. I didn't see any anti-racist activist speak out in defense of Priti Patel when they were having a pop at her for being an immigrant and a foreigner because of her new immigration policy. I didn't see any anti-racist activist piping up and, having a riot when Kanye West was told that he wasn't black for voting Trump. You don't have to agree with his political stance, but the point stands that regardless of who he is, he has a right to choose which way he wants to vote.
Yeah, that's right. But I mean, then again, that comes down to like where this blackness comes from. That's why I oppose. Okay, or with Priti Patel, she's whatever South Asian, like I guess brownness or something, or Indianness. I have no fucking clue, like how But if you don't think like this, again, someone I mentioned just earlier, Sarah Hayter, she did this really long thread on intersectionality, and it was really, like I said, Sarah is one of the more measured people I know, and she said, okay, it got this right, and it started talking about this, it made some good points, and then it went off the rails, and I used the term, I said, like, I think I mentioned it too, like, it's, when she wrote mapping the margins, she didn't map them, she gerrymandered them, right? She gerrymandered the margins, and it's, so, by the end of it, Sarah got called, you're talking white, you're sounding white, you've become white. So I mean, I joked around and I took the Shakespeare quote and I said, and I use the word bodies specifically because they don't talk about human beings or people, they talk about bodies, right? Talk about dehumanizing. Like, and I said, some bodies are born white, some attain whiteness, and some have whiteness thrust upon them. So Priti Patel has had whiteness thrust upon her. I mean, like, it's ridiculous, and they're anti-racist.
Look how racist it actually sounds. It's the anti-racists that are the biggest racists I've ever met. Like I said, I find it very difficult to have any affection or liking for these people now because of the toxic stench that constantly leaks from them. It's like they've done a dirty fart and you just can't get away from the stench of it. It's disgusting. They're so unbelievably divisive. Like, that's just not gonna help anybody. Like, the nicest thing you can be doing is living peacefully together, but they have a problem with that. The whole microaggressions thing.
Oh,
Do you know
good Lord.
what? I used to love it when kids used to ask me about the food that I was eating rather than telling me it looked like ducky, right? Because that was the kind of stuff kids would say when you were a kid. But again, like, as a child, like, I was told, when I said to my mum and dad that was what they said it was because it was racist. No, because our food does look funny and it does smell a bit funny, and if you're not used to it, then they don't really realize, those kids don't realize that what they're saying is actually like hurtful, you know. But I mean, that aside, I think kids are horrible.
Oh yeah, but kids can be great, and kids are just the worst. I mean, like, you know, like they're
exactly, they say things with no filter, right? But all my parents had to say was, well, they've never said anything like that, you know, and offer a different perspective. But rather than doing that, it was, this is racism, right? How is that helpful? Because then I'm going to go into school thinking, right, they have a problem with the melanin in my skin, and actually it was nothing to do with that. It was just that my food looked funny and smelt funny, and we hadn't had a conversation about it, and they just didn't know, right? So it's parents have to take some responsibility for this as well. But our parents, and at this point I do mean brown parents, because that's our experience, right? That they are very, very racist and very divisive, and they look for racism when it's not there. They place racism when it's not there. It's this constant pushing it into our lives. But now you've got activists doing it because they don't have the same, you know, scale of issue to deal with that they might have had a few decades ago. They're creating it where it doesn't belong. I would have loved those conversations about my food, my clothes, my music. I would love those healthy discussions. But of course, that's a microaggression now, so we must shut up.
Yeah, okay. And just, you know, personal or whatever, growing up in Canada, until the PC stuff started in the late 80s, okay, the two times when I felt, you know, most like an outsider was when the PC stuff started in the late 80s, and all these people meeting well, you know, were very careful about how they talked around me. I'm like, fuck it, just let loose, talk how you're going to talk, because you're treating me differently because of the color of my skin. And the other times I've really felt different was when we'd go back, when I was a kid, we'd go back to India to visit, especially the first time I went back. When I moved to Canada, I was 6. First time I went back, I was 10. I looked the same, I spoke the same language, I ate the same food, I was going to visit my family, but I felt so different because I could not relate to anything.
Oh, and what did they say to you? Because this is what a lot of South Asians here say, right? They say that they don't feel like they belong here, but I think that is their parents' fault, because now, as an adult, a lot of my friends that are English and are white say to me, "You are English, Sadia." If we start having these discussions about like how people make me feel, right? They're like, "But you're English. First and foremost, you're English." And I'm like, yeah, actually I am. Like, I've got a healthy mix of the two, but my dominant personality is quite English, actually. And I've no problem with somebody who's more Pakistani, provided they don't have animosity towards the other part of themselves. I think that's unhealthy, right? But I have to say, I've also felt more conscious of who I am when I'm with these activists. This PC-ness makes me feel it doesn't make me feel weird in that way, but it makes me feel weird in the sense that I feel sorry for the people that are walking on eggshells. I'm like, what do you think I'm going to do to you if you get things wrong? I'm not going to explode. And if somebody has exploded, with you because you've asked a question that they thought was inappropriate, then they're probably a little bit mental. And also that probably means that they have very little to complain about. If a question triggers you to insanity and triggers you to get angry with somebody, then your life's pretty cushy, mate, because a few years ago, rather than a question, it might have been a punch to the face.
Yep. And I mean, and again, like, I really hate some of these videos that are coming out, like, not just recently, but for a couple of years, but it was late last year, I think, or it might have been early this year, I don't know, but I believe it was late last year. It was a black woman. She was maybe 20. She was a student at a university. I think it was University of Virginia. And she got up in a common space, all right? And she said, something, and I'm paraphrasing whatever, something like, all you white people have to leave. This is now only for people of color. Okay. Now, her friends took that video. They posted it being proud of her.
Yeah.
Now, she got pilloried. Now, I have a little bit less sympathy there because not because of what she said, but because you put that up being proud of yourself, right? And that's actually a ridiculous thing to say. But again, coming off all this stuff, like this didn't come out of nowhere. I don't think this young woman is racist, okay? I think she's being taught this stuff. This is, again, go back and look at when this came into schools. She's being taught this. And they specifically say that. LA Times, just because of all this stuff, re-upped a piece from 2018, and it reminded me of the Family Guy episode when the border guard looks at Peter and he looks at him at the color chart, right? But the LA Times had a pie chart with different shades of black and brown, and it said how different people of color have, how different people of color experience more racism due to, because of the shade of their skin. And it's just like,
okay, so if we want to have that discussion, let's talk about how, I've got a friend who's Pakistani. Because she's darker skinned, like the crap that she gets from her family, and they're all Pakistani, but she's a darker shade of Pakistani. Stuart Hall wrote about this as well. Like, he was West Indian and he was darker, and because of that, the racism within his community that he faced. Let's talk about that then. It's just, you either deal with the whole issue of racism, and I don't like the fact that the definition's been changed either.
Oh yeah, that's all garbage.
It's ridiculous. So white people can never experience racism. I feel like my head's starting to hurt from this whole.
My black friend, my white friend.
I've never heard that more than when I was working in London, by the way. So I thankfully don't live in London, right? So it's weird in London because it is more of a metropolitan-y, left-wing, hipstery place. And in those kinds of places, what you find is your identity is brought up more. Somebody will monopolize on your identity, whether you're female, whether you're brown, whether you're an atheist even, because even the atheist community is guilty of kind of, my atheism is the kind of the most important thing in my life. When actually, where I live, my identity is never brought up, and it's never even something that's talked about amongst my friends and amongst my loved ones. It's never even mentioned. Surely that's what we should be striving for, rather than my identity, my list of identities tattooed on my forehead. Exactly.
It's who you are, not what you are. I mean, it's going to sound corny and stupid, but when you look at that identity thing, like that intersectionality, right? With the intersection of all your different identities, but it's their definition of what that identity means, and it's, so that's, no, I'm sorry, but you are, the whole of you is greater than the sum of all those little identities, and it should be about what who you are, not what you are. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, I've done my 23andMe. My dad, my father specifically moved us to a, quote unquote Canadian neighborhood. There were starting to be South Asian ghettos. He did not want to go into those. He said, nope, I left India to leave India to come to Canada, right? Was my father racist? No, I mean, but like you said, I'm Canadian. I identify with being a Canadian, and whatever that means. I don't mean in a nationalistic sense. I have pride in whatever Canada represents to me. But
your identity,
but more so than Indian or whatever. But my father was always proud of his Arabic lineage, right? He used to make a lot of it. His friends in Hyderabad, his nickname was Chaush, and apparently that's an Urdu slang for someone who's an Arab, right?
Right.
And even though, he had, one of his friends was a descendant of Mughals, he was related to the Nizam of Hyderabad. Okay, so and he had another one who had something. So these people had Arab, but my father always put. I did my 23andMe. And same thing for my whatever happens in the Pakistani. My mother and father were first cousins, so my grandmothers were sisters, right? And and so they both came from Yemen. On my mom's side, like her father, I think had like Turkish and Persian and some Saudi blood in him and stuff like that. So when I did my 23andMe, I'm about 60% South Asian, and I'm about 31, 32 Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
But my dad always made up. Now, I have no connection to Yemen. Like, I mean, I have family there, but I have no connection to that culture. I have a connection to Indian culture in a way, but my father also talked about his Arab side, right? But he always talked about it in connection to India and in connection to where he grew up and his friends. And I mean, but it's like, to me, it's okay. I've got all that, but if the Olympics are on, I'm cheering for Canada. I'm not cheering for India or Yemen. Like, like.
But okay, somebody asked me earlier. I'm gonna ask you to do it. Actually, somebody asked me to describe myself earlier, right? Like tell them about myself, right? So if I ask you, tell me about yourself, what would be the first thing that comes to your mind to talk about?
I don't know. Okay, because I've been thinking about this lately, and it would be my approach to how I look at the world.
Yeah.
And I mean, when I say that, it's not like I'm getting on some soapbox and saying, I believe in Enlightenment values, blah, 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 blah. But like, tell me about yourself. Okay, you know what? Okay, I could start with the bio stuff, born in India, grew up in Canada, whatever, but that's useless. That doesn't tell you anything, right? It's like pointing at a bird and going, that's a crow. A little kid pointing at a bird going, that's a crow. They don't know anything about that bird, right? They know it's called a crow. They know that particular bird is, but they can look at a raven and go, that's a bigger crow. They don't know, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. But I mean, I would describe myself as, yes, I believe in Enlightenment values, but I would go on more than just saying I believe in Enlightenment values. If you want, and again, it comes in a context. Like if you're on it's a case that you're on a first date, tell me about yourself. Fine. This is where I work. This is what I do. This is what I like to do for fun. Okay, that's a different thing, right? If it's a conversation about who are you as a person, then that's me defining my values, because that is more who I am a person than the fact
your race isn't going to come into it, your religion, your political views aren't going to come into it. That is actually for me, generally, that tends to be the least interesting thing about people. I don't want to know where they come from. I don't actually care.
Nope.
Like, I don't want to know about their race. I don't want to know about, like, their ethnicity might be interesting if it's a massive part of their life, but generally what I want to know is what they do for a living, maybe what taste they have in music, like, are we going to want to jam together type thing, like, what foods they like there's certain common things that you have. Like, the very first thing anybody asks me about myself, the very first thing that always comes out of my mouth is that I've worked in the violence against women sector for this long, this is the area that I'm interested in, that's what I still do as a profession, right? I don't talk about my beliefs, my belief, the lack of belief. I don't talk about my politics. I don't talk about my race. None of that is relevant. So if somebody thinks that is the first thing that they should be talking about, to me, instantly, I think you're going to be quite a divisive character, aren't you? Because it's the least interesting thing about them. Like, their characteristics, if that's all they've got to advertise, then actually they're probably quite a shallow, hollow person that I'm not really interested in.
Yeah. And I mean, that's precisely it. Like, you don't... Okay, yes, the color of my skin, because of where... And I think this would be the same in India. Like you said, there is... I mean, people in... South India hate the people in the north. People in the north hate the people, and I've heard my father talking about, he's from there in India. He's, he's cheap, blah, 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 blah. Because is that racism? Is that bigotry? But it is a form of bigotry. I mean, I don't know if it's racism or whatever, but like the color of my skin or whatever, growing up in Montreal, yes, that has, me being called a Paki, now and then when I was a kid. Yes, that does inform my worldview. Like, no, it's not nice, and no, you shouldn't do it to people. Fine, great. But on the flip side of that, I think I've talked to a few people about this. But like, when I was 14 or 15, I was taking transit in Montreal. On the seat back in front of me, someone wrote, "White power, black caca. They spelled white, W-H-I-T. They spelled power, P-O-W-O-R. They spelled black, B-L-A-K. The only word they spelled correctly was caca. I was 14 or 15. I laughed. I laughed like you're doing now. Like, it was stupid. And after that point, I'm like, you know what? If that's your mentality and you're coming at me, it's like you're a packy, you're whatever. I've heard all of them. You're a push start. You're a pull start. Like I don't care.
Imagine where we are right now, because that is, we would see the flip of that, right? We would see like black, like power of blacks is like superior and white is caca. I don't think that's the solution. I think if that's what we're heading, which we very much are, you've got people taking the knee for something that they have nothing to do with. I don't think that's the solution. I really don't. We're heading in a really bad direction. How are we going to make people feel reading that? I think, but this is it, right? It's a lack of intelligence. The people that are going to be putting stuff like that out there is a lack of intelligence. Maybe they don't know how to do things, but these activists that are leading these campaigns have a bit of a responsibility to steer these campaigns in the right direction, so you don't have people going and smashing up people's buildings, their homes, their neighborhoods, smashing up people's faces that have got nothing to do with any of this. Any of the kind of experiences that they're having, like
the taking the knee and all these little ceremonies. I just want to just hold it for a second. But like what you mentioned, like the anti-white racism, and like the New York Times. I mean, she's no longer there, and it wasn't because of her tweet. She's no longer there because they said she didn't do a good job. Now I don't know the internals there, so I'm not going to even. I think her name was Sarah Jeong. There was tweets going back. She's like, I wake up in the morning, wanting to kill white men. Those were her tweets. Okay. New York Times hired her as an editor for their op-ed page. Like, I think the chief editor for their op-ed page. I don't know the exact, but high up. In Canada, a couple of years back, like I said, a few. Pardon?
Is that all it takes to get hired by them?
No. Well, okay. She didn't get hired because of that, but that was her mentality. Like, there were plenty of tweets going back saying stuff like that. In Canada, there was a First Nations woman. I believe it was in Calgary. I could get this wrong, but she held up a sign saying "Kill all white people." She was not charged with a hate crime, and she was not. We have hate speech laws. I do not like hate speech laws. I wish they were gone, but she was not charged with hate speech. Yeah. I'm sorry. This is not helping anyone, because again, this comes down to racism is prejudice plus power. So you can't be racist against white people because that's the system. That's wrong. Okay, and. With these kneeling things, I think there's a couple of. I think you have to differentiate a couple of things. Police officers and stuff, or military people coming out, kneeling down with the protesters, showing some solidarity. I think that's good, right? That picture of those people washing their feet, or that video of the white people kneeling down, begging forgiveness from the black people. Then the black people kneel down in prayer, and then they ask for forgiveness. I'm like, I'm sorry, but you do not what? So those people who did that little ceremony where they asked for forgiveness and then prayed with the black, are they now absolved of their original sin by all black people? Like, did these black people there, do they have that authority to, like, they're completely absolved? Yeah. Okay, like, no. Like, and that to me is like, when you heard Hitchens talk about vicarious guilt, right? No, I'm not. Someone's not taking on my guilt, and I'm not taking on someone else's, and I'm not paying for the sins of the father. Again, we can talk about it in the South Asian community, racism against black people, but I've seen South Asian activists put up things like, we need to look out for BIPOC rights. BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. If you follow that thinking, Black and Indigenous people have been more oppressed, so their oppression is more important than other peoples of color, so you should listen to it first. You're in the UK, you're talking about BIPOC rights? Fine, let's talk about rights for Celts and Picts then, all right? Those are the Indigenous people in the UK. Should we talk about Celtish rights? Like if you want to go down that road, let's play it, or let's find something fucking sensible.
Yeah, but what is the problem with equality for all?
Yeah.
Why is that a good foundation? Why do they need to have this one-upmanship? Like, okay. I don't really understand.
Have you ever read Frantz Fanon?
No.
Okay. It is a horrific book. Read Wretched of the Earth. This guy was a psychologist from France. I believe he might have Moroccan heritage. I could be wrong. but he was in Algeria for the FLN, for the Algerian Liberation. And I mean, he wrote a lot of stuff, but basically the essence of it was an oppressed and marginalized person or peoples will only ever find closure if they oppress their oppressors for the same amount of time. So there's a retributive aspect to this. So, and a lot of these, like, if you look at Antifa, if you look at some, okay, and, you know, Antifa is not one big, huge organization. It's the same thing with Black Lives Matter. It's not a national organization. There's Black Lives Matter everywhere. Some of the people in Black Lives Matter Toronto say these things about killing white people. It's horrific. But that doesn't stand for all of Black Lives Matter, right? But they pull a lot from on. So that kind of thinking where you are making them suffer for what they did to you, like, you know, these people who are kneeling down, I don't know if their families owned slaves. Maybe they did, but what if they were, you know, new immigrants that came over to the United States from Europe after World War II, and their families have been there? Do they have anything to do with slavery? Like, even if they're coming from the UK, and you want to blame UK for slavery worldwide, which is kind of stupid, but anyways, the average person living in the UK when slavery was going on were, you know, serfs for lack of a better term. You know, like, they might have been some merchants or whatever, but they were workers. They worked on a farm. They were, you know, tradespeople. They had nothing to do with slavery. They didn't own slaves. They weren't in the slaving business. So if they came over for if the Irish people during the famine came over for a better life, they had nothing to do with slavery, or, you know, or people coming over, like, so.
The color of your skin has nothing to do with that.
It shouldn't. It shouldn't. And it's, I mean, I think we're starting to go a little round and round, but I mean, you know, but I mean, that's the basic thing. This stuff that they're using, all I'm asking people to do is, yes, be against racism.
Yeah.
Be for equality for everyone. And let's talk about equality for everyone. And you know what? In New York City, there might be more racism towards black people than there are towards other groups. And that's a problem in New York City. Whereas if you're down in Phoenix, Arizona, it might be against the Hispanic community.
Yeah.
So what works in New York City will not work in Phoenix. I mean, the underlying idea of we treat everyone equal, let's treat everyone with respect, let's, you know, and here, I mean, I'm going to sound like some, you know, critical race here. Let's hear what people are saying. But when they say let's listen, it's, you cannot question. So if I told you something was racist and you didn't see why it was racist, you have every right to ask me why it's racist. It's not some big, it shouldn't be a hardship for me to tell you. And when someone tells you that they're not being serious, just walk away.
No, and the thing is also, look, it's been used so much now. Racist, Nazi, fascist. Those words have been used so much now that when you're confronted by an actual, you know, racist or an actual Nazi or an actual fascist, if you use those words, they're going to be meaningless. People aren't going to take it seriously. So they're devaluing they're devaluing their own kind of, their own language in a way, because I mean, I know that this has been done to death as well, really. But they need to take a more sensible approach, and I don't think they are at the moment. No. And right now, we could have had with everything that was happening with George Floyd, like I said, that I don't know anybody, me and myself included, who hasn't condemned this. Yeah. Everybody has condemned it. Left, right, everybody. Like I said, find me somebody who defended those officers. It would be near enough impossible. And if you do, they probably are, in some kind of institute, to be fair. But now would have been a really sensible time, particularly with an election looming, to have discussions about police brutality, the amount of force that police can use, about creating an independent body that regulates and oversees police behavior and conduct, about guns, about policing by consent is something we use in the UK, having that kind of model there. But I think we've missed that opportunity because of the conduct of the rioters, to be quite honest. And that's going to be what most people focus on now. But I mean, okay, it's a huge missed opportunity.
With the policing too, right? Let's look at what's not worked. I mean, honestly, I'd like someone to take a look at when this stuff came into the policing of how to deal with racism. And then at the same time, look at the media. When you're constantly told that you are under attack from the police. Like the distrust from the citizens towards the police and the distrust from the police towards the citizens is a huge issue. And I'm not saying that distrust towards the police is not warranted. Like, there's plenty of problems. But they're making this issue in Canada, right? From 2000 to 2017, because those are the only stats I could find, there were 450 some odd police killing civilians. Okay, in 17 years. In the United States last year, there was over 1,000. So to compare Canada to the United States as saying we have the same level of problems, let's be a little realistic. Let's be realistic. Let's not blow this out of. Let's not make people scared again. And if we can go back and look at, was this stuff working? Why are we going to continue with it? Right? If it's not working, let's go back to that ethic of we share commonalities. Let's instead of focusing on what makes us different, what makes us common. Everyone wants. I'm sure police officers, for the most part, and communities want better relations between police and communities. They want police there to make them safe. But again, you can go into the stats or whatever. Let's look at, if you want to talk about policing in the United States in the communities, it was Democrat mayors, it was Democrat governors, and I don't want to make this a partisan issue, but especially the mayors who were asking for more police in their communities because there were problems with crack, because there were, and I don't want to, and there's all kinds of underlying issues in those communities, but nothing was really being done because you were focusing just on the drugs, not on anything else, or you're just focusing on poverty, not on anything else.
This is the other issue, right? I think that the other issue is that the law isn't applied in the same way in every community. So if we were to take the British context, a major complaint here had become that in terms of the grooming gangs, the police weren't going after them because they didn't want to upset racial sensibilities, right? So if the law isn't applied in the same way across the board, the law is the law, right? You make sure the law is fair and proportionate, and then that's your guide as a professional, be you the police or any other statutory service. That is your foundation. You use that in the same way wherever you are policing. That this issue is occurring. These are the policies. These are the laws that are relevant in this instance, and I use them, and that's it. Then you take out this kind of allegation of racism. So to me, I think that the law has to be applied and policy has to be applied in the same way across the board. If you're a citizen or a resident of this country, this is the law, this is the policy that I'm using, this is why I'm using it, that's it. I think that when you have communities that feel like they shouldn't be policed at all because of their ethnicity or their beliefs or whatever it is, then you start having a problem as well. So like if there is criminality in a community, then the law needs to be used to deal with that. That's it. That the conversation about racism sometimes can be used to say that the police is racist because they're even using the law to come after us. That's the other kind of component of this conversation. Like in George Floyd's case, it was the brutality that was the issue. And police brutality has been used across the board in the US particularly. I don't think we have the same level of brutality in the UK because we just have a different policing system. Yes, we have problems with the police. I quite like the police. When they do their job well, they're fantastic. And also the police recruits are an issue here as well. I met one police officer who told me that he used to go and fight every weekend. He used to go uptown, fight every weekend, and that was normal for him. And the police straightened him out, but he was pretty scary as a police officer as well, to be quite honest. There's a lot of sensible discussions that we're not being able to have because of the way this issue's now been handled, and I feel like that is a missed opportunity actually.
I'm a little bit more optimistic. I think we still have a chance because while all the protesting can go on as long as you want. Well, while all the rioting, the looting, and the violence and the insanity is going on, we can't have this conversation. It's devolving to the crowd in Minneapolis saying, "Okay, disband the police department." It's not an answer. But yeah, it's like I said, I mean, we've been at this for a little bit. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but
100%. So it's gonna go any minute.
Unfortunately, Sadia's battery ran out, so we were disconnected. Anyways, we were finishing up. Anyways, thank you all for listening. I will recommend again that look in the bottom for the links for new discourses. Please go check it out if you want to get more of an idea of what we were talking about, where some of these words come from. James Lindsay has done a great job. He's put in every article, there's all the bibliography, papers, books, wherever he got it from, and then it has links to other articles on his site that explain some of this other stuff. Anyways, thank you everyone for listening, and thanks a lot for Sadia for coming back on. Bye.